Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us today. I'm Armando F. Sanchez, CEO, Armando F. Sanchez Production. Very honored to have Dr. Christine Reyna. She is in Chicago in the university there. And she's a 10-year professor in psychology in DePaul University, Chicago. She has 30 academic publications. That's big. That's a lot of work. I don't know how she does it. I think she's only 21 and she's already got all this going on for her. Graduated from UCLA. I'm not USC, so no issues here in social psychology. And she comes from a family of literary figures, her mom, her brother, and just an applause. I am always in awe of how wonderful work the whole family does as well. So, un aplauso.
Thank you for having me.
Dr. Reyna, you are a teacher at the university, and you give out grades. You pick A, B, C, D, and Fs. They still get about Fs?
Oh, yes.
They still get Fs. What does a student need to do? What are the strategies for the students follow that get the highest grades in your class? A's, A pluses, I don't know. Some teachers do that. But what are the strategies that you see the students following that make them successful?
Yeah, definitely. That's a great question. Before I answer that, I think that it's important for students to understand that the vast majority of Americans never get a college degree. Students who are in high school, high school is catering to the average American who is not going to go to college. And so a lot of times the study skills and habits that students develop in high school, which enables them to be successful, do not necessarily correspond with what makes students successful in college. Once you get to college, you and everyone else like you are the cream of the crop, and the standards are higher and the demands are higher. And so a lot of times you have to abandon your bad habits and develop some new ones in order to be successful in the classroom. And the number one tip I have for success is, first and foremost, just show up. Just show up. That is such a huge impact on learning, on engagement, on positioning yourself to be able to implement a lot of the strategies for success. You can't, if you're not there, you're not going to make it.
One discussion, something you shared with me earlier when we were preparing for this program, is that for the most part, high schools, unless they're private, the high schools are paid by the taxpayer. A university like yours or other private universities, and even the state ones, they have a fee as well. Especially the private schools now are running almost $250,000 in 4 years.
Yeah.
The parents are paying for it. And if I have my numbers correct, and thank you for helping me figure this out, one 3-hour class of all the classes you take in 4 years, the class is costing around $170 an hour.
Wow. Yeah.
Which comes out to almost $60,000 a year, almost $250 for the 4 years. Yeah. $170 an hour. Very different from high school. And if they don't graduate, they have to pay that fund. Yeah. So they're stuck with the bill if they don't graduate. If they do, well, they can make, as a professional, a good amount of money. So why don't the students show up?
That's, that's a really great question. I think, a lot of it is they haven't adopted good habits and a culture of being a college student. So there's this sort of continuation of, well, sometimes I could skip a class, or, in college, it's also a really difficult transition time for students. This is the first time they're adults. It's the first time they're out of the home. It's the first time there's no surveillance, where they're making their own choices. And some of them make bad choices. Some of my students are partying the night before and can't make it to a morning class, or they sleep in and they haven't built up a habit of how to wake themselves up in the morning in order to get to class, and so, I definitely recommend that students need my father always used to say, you play like you practice. You're not going to suddenly become a different person the moment you step foot on a college campus. So if you're not developing that discipline earlier, it's going to be way harder for you to do it when you have to, and it's costly.
Very costly.
Yeah.
You said you had other points. That was number one.
So showing up, I think, is really important. You just get a lot more experience and knowledge. I also think that a lot of students don't understand how to study. One thing that I see in my classes is that there's a lot of different types of learning, and some classes and some tests or assignments really tap into different aspects of learning. And if you're not aligning your study habits to the task, you may be spending a lot of time studying and it's not going to pay off. So let me give you some examples. When we try to learn about theory, so I'm a psychologist, right? So students who take psych classes often have to learn about a lot of theories, in the field, or, principles and things. And on the one hand, you have comprehension, right? Which is you learn about it and it makes sense to you. You're following along, you comprehend it. The ability to recall it in a test is a whole other skill set, right? So one big mistake that students make is they'll read over their notes and they'll be like, yep, I get it all. But they're not practicing recalling the terms if you're given a definition, or remembering what that important finding was, right? So they're not challenging their memory, they're just understanding the material. And so usually, I always encourage my students to come and speak to me when they're not doing well in the class. They're failing the tests or something. And first thing I ask is, how are you studying? And they're like, well, I take notes and then I read over my notes. And I'm like, okay. And you probably understand them all, right? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, okay, you comprehend the material, but you're not training yourself to recall it. And that's what's on the test. So I say, make flashcards. I say, and and this is another thing students do wrong. Like, they'll make a flashcard, they'll see a term, they won't recall it, and they'll flip it over and go, oh yeah, I remember that. If you have to flip it, you don't know it. It goes in the I don't know it pile. And you've got to keep reviewing it until you know it without flipping that card over.
So what I'm learning from you is the idea that they have to demonstrate that they know it, that they can say it, well, I can eventually figure it out, or I can go to Google and remind myself. If you can't demonstrate it to the professor who's going to grade you right on the spot, they're going to ask you some terms, some essays. If you cannot demonstrate it, i.e. to the professor says you don't know it.
Yeah, exactly. Period. And in larger classes, students who go to these schools where there's 300 people in a class or more, sometimes probably you're going to get mostly multiple choice tests, which means you need to get a lot of flashcards. Nowadays they have apps that you can use. Multiple choice tests are just a whole different ball game. Comprehension, understanding the material, is going to really help you with papers, with writing really thoughtful papers. But in multiple choice tests, you need to do more. And then you have labs, where you have to actually master a skill, right? So whether it's statistics or whether it's conducting an experiment in a chemistry lab, like, you have to master those skills, and that takes practice. And that's another study strategy, right? That you can't learn just by passively sitting in class or just reading over your notes. So mapping the study strategy to the task is, I think, a really important thing to learn early on. And it's probably the number one reason students who are trying really hard miss the mark.
Number three,
that students should try to engage the material using what we call multiple modalities. So we've learned in cognitive psychology that to create deep learning, you need to engage the material multiple times, but also if you use multiple modalities. For example, reading is one modality. Writing notes actually retains the memory better than typing notes or not taking notes at all, just reading someone else's notes. So there's something about the writing process that reinforces memory. That's a different modality. Maybe watching YouTube videos about the topic. That's a different modality. Talking about it with your friends or in a study group. That's a different modality. The more modalities you can employ in order to engage with the material, the better and deeper your learning is going to be.
Okay, so what I'm interpreting in my terms is that the more you dabble with the information in different levels, as you say, communicate with your friends, study groups, writing it on the side, even though it's over here on the book, you're transferring information, but you're actually forcing yourself to remember it.
Yeah, and you're creating different nodes in your brain in terms of how to link that material together.
Wonderful, wonderful. Next one.
Number 4 is I really do encourage students to form study groups. A broader version of this is to surround yourself by people who have good academic habits. So let me talk about study groups first. Study groups are really important because sometimes the best way to learn something is to teach it, is to talk about it. And I think students, when they're isolated, they can get very confused very quickly, and kind of like having that hive mind of like, well, how did you interpret it? Or what did you do? Or what did you get on this problem? Can really, really help students teach each other. And it actually makes being at college really fun too, and much more enjoyable. You know, you're connecting, you're socializing, which is really important when students leave home for the first time and they feel really isolated. Also, that idea of surrounding yourself by scholarly others. You know, yes, you're going to probably go to parties and stuff like that, which is great. But if you're only surrounding yourself by people who party, that's not going to be a good trajectory for you. You know, Warren Buffett says one of the greatest, tools to success is the people you hang out with. Like, are you hanging out with successful people, with people who are better than you or striving? And the same thing applies for college. Like, you need to have a group of people who are going to say, hey, let's go to dinner after we study, or let's make sure we get together and get this homework done, before we go to the party or whatever. And so I think that that's really important, to try to create a scholarly community. And that can also happen within the classroom, right? Sitting next to people, like if there's the student who's always raising her hand and answering the questions, like maybe scoot your chair over and kind of be near them. And so when, people are working in groups, you make sure you're in her group, so paying attention to the people you're with and their influence on you, I think, is important.
You remind me of something that I had forgotten from colleges a few years back. The idea that the amount of information that is being shared at a college environment is many times more condensed and faster than a high school. In 1 year, you could put maybe 12 years of K to 12 in there.
Yeah.
It's just very accelerated. So what I'm learning from you is that if I get into a study group, different people are pitching different angles to the information, and I'm accelerating how fast I'm retaining information. So I want to thank you for that. I totally forgot about that.
That's a really great thing to add, and another sort of angle on what I was saying. My students get 10 weeks. They have 10 weeks, and then that's their grade forever. That's totally different from high school.
Right. They don't have the time. You don't have the time to really be wondering. By the time you sort of figure it out, you're on week 9.
Yeah, there's no margin of, there's such a tiny margin of error. So the more you can implement these strategies and, get help from others, the better.
Absolutely. Thank you. Your next point?
Yeah, the next point is students need to check their grades regularly. And that's really important because based on what we were just exactly saying, that, you're on this truncated timeline, you don't have a lot of time to course correct if you start to drift off track. And so, sometimes students wait until the week before finals week to say, like, I'm not getting the grade I want, or I'm failing. And I'm like, it's too late. There's nothing we can do now. There's no more assignments, So I really encourage students to be monitoring their grades every week, or even after every assignment, to make sure that they build in the time to course correct. to talk to, if they didn't get a good grade on the first test, okay, what am I doing wrong? Set up that appointment to talk to the instructor or the teaching assistant. Sit down with your exam, talk about your study habits, be honest. Because if you're not honest, they're not going to help you. They're not going to tell you what you're doing wrong, but do it soon. Because by the time the quarter or the semester is coming to an end, it is too late. No matter how much that professor wants to help you, there's just not a lot that can be done. So just stay on top of things and act.
Quarters are brutal.
Quarters are brutal. Quarters are
Well,
brutal.
I always went to a semester school, but quarters are brutal. I mean, you're preparing for your final on the first day of class.
Basically.
It really is.
Basically.
10 weeks, you don't have enough time.
And on that point, and this is another thing I see a lot for students who are not successful, they feel really scared about reaching out to professors. And I don't know why. I mean, I get that there's a status thing, but we want to get to know you. We want to meet you. We want to talk to you. We want to know who you are. And we want to help you. So, I see all too often that students aren't doing well. And so they retreat or they just check out. And avoidance is the worst strategy you can use when it comes to your grades.
Let me ask you this. Maybe there's a misnomer here. Maybe it's the wrong title. What would happen if we said, actually, your professors are actually your coaches?
Yeah. I mean, in a lot of ways, we do a lot of coaching, actually, when students let us, right? I mean, not all. There's we're super variable, but I think I do a lot of coaching.
So if the student sees it and says, "Oh, I can't go to the coach until I'm perfect," well, then you miss the whole point of having a coach. The coach is going to tell you from point A, you're starting here, you start wrong, and you got to put these pieces together so that at the end you come out. The other point I'm learning from you is that whatever strategy you learn to be successful in your class can carry over to the next class, to the next semester, to the next quarter, to the next, different levels. The strategies carry over.
Yeah. And the habits.
Their
you
habits.
Build those habits early.
I like that. I like that a lot.
Yeah.
You had other points.
I did. I think that a lot of students don't realize how many resources universities have to help students succeed. Absolutely take advantage of these resources. Absolutely take advantage. Most science classes will have tutors, for example. Most of the math classes that students will take in college, there'll be an entire program of just math tutoring. And colleges have what are called writing centers, which are super important. And a lot of times students feel either they don't know that these resources exist, which is probably the majority of the case, or they're nervous about using them. They think, oh, only kids who are remedial use these services. No, the successful students use these services. The ones who are staying on top of everything, reinforcing their knowledge. And think about a tutoring session. That's just another opportunity to relearn and reinforce your knowledge. In my stats class, I remember right before class was one of the tutoring sessions for statistics. And a bunch of my students would always get together, and it was like a study group and a tutoring session kind of built in one. And they bonded and they did so well in class. So find out what the resources are and absolutely use them. But also understand what their system is. So for the writing center, if they're going to be reading your paper, like you can't go to the writing center the day the paper's due. Like you need to plan ahead to finish a draft with enough days that they can read it, and you can set up an appointment and they can go over the feedback with you and you can make those changes. So you do have to plan ahead for some of these things, but yeah, build that in to the strategy.
I'm 70 years old. I've done shows for 20 years. Right now I'm writing a whole series of ebooks, and I still working on my writing. It's not something you just get and finish. There's no finish.
Lifelong.
Lifelong. I mean, you've written 30 journals or more by now.
God.
And I mean, none of us are finished on the first shot. And people say, oh, here's my first draft, I'm finished. I said, no. If you're going with that attitude, you're not going to carry all the way through. So you remind me of that. And I got all my editing notes all over the place. You're always editing.
Yes, always. And that's a wonderful segue into my final and final and possibly most important when it comes to papers, absolutely positively build in an editing and revising step when you write a paper. It's like multiple steps. I mean, I'm embarrassed to say how many drafts. I'm probably not embarrassed, but like before I ever submit a paper for publication, I've probably gone through 20 drafts. I would never, ever dream of submitting anything. I tell my students, your first draft is your worst draft. Like, why would you turn in your worst draft for a grade? Like, that's consequential. Like but students, what students do is they wait until the last minute, they crank out a paper, right before the deadline, and then they hit submit. A lot of times they don't even reread it.
Chances are when you do your first draft and you send that in, you're 95% in a kill mode. Yep. It's not going to work. I mean, this is worth about 2 pennies, even though it should be worth $100.
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
And then that's the one they submit and say, oh, I hope everything works out.
Like, I truly don't understand that, but it's very, very common. And I think, once again, these are kind of these bad habits that come out of high school. In some of these, schools, they're just grateful that the students are showing up, and doing the assignment in the first place. There's not a lot of time for public school instructors to be giving a lot of feedback on writing. Well, so a lot of students don't know they're bad writers.
Well, the other thing they said, the biggest change for the students, and again, through your statements that I'm learning and reminding myself of, is that the first thing is now they're adults.
Yeah.
And that changes everything. They're treated like adults. The student has to take the initiative to get whatever is not right in place.
Yeah.
And you're there to coach, but you're not there to hold hands. High school tends to do that. We have a semester, yada, yada, all these things. That doesn't work in college at all. In the quarter system, wow.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. I mean, in papers in my class, 10% of the grade, an entire letter grade, is devoted to the quality of the writing. I mean, because that's one of the most important skills anyone's going to get out of college. The vast majority of people don't work in their majors. The vast majority of college graduates will not work in the field that they majored in. So what are they doing after college? How are they getting these great jobs after college? It's because they're learning skills like writing. Like, writing is vital. Being able to communicate, almost every industry you get into will require the ability to communicate effectively. And so we care a lot about writing. And students need, like, if the paper is due Friday, you need to have a full draft by Wednesday so that you could spend Thursday editing and revising it. And that needs to be built into their scheduling. Like, they need to plan that out. They don't write Friday as the due date, write Wednesday as the due date, knowing that you need to build in that editing time.
If you need to party, you party after the quarter's over, not during the quarter. There's no time. There is just no time. I mean, you're there to dedicate your time to that quarter system.
Yeah.
And the quarters is a very special, high-ended, high demand, high speed. You just don't have a breather, and that's just life.
Yeah.
In top executive world, that's the way it is. Daily. There's no quarter breaks.
Right. There's no there's no rough drafts. And oftentimes in college, there isn't rough drafts either. It's just, one and done. And then you've got to move on to the next assignment. My husband was in a fraternity that, as many fraternities are, had a lot of parties. And he had a strategy. He said, Friday nights, when I knew there was going to be a party, when my classes were over, I would go and spend the whole afternoon in the library, finishing all my assignments, knowing when I get home, it's going to be crazy. Like, build that in. Create that accommodation, that allowance that allows you to put your academic success first, and then have fun.
And fun doesn't have to be parties. Fun can be you're part of a sports group. You go out and play basketball with your group. I mean, there's many options. Yeah. It doesn't have to be the Hollywood version where everybody gets together on togas and then has a celebration. It's much more than that. But
and actually nowadays, it's parties are a lot more rare. It's more people getting together with friend groups, or in our very modern times, a lot of times it's like going back to the dorm and gaming with your buddies online.
That's
But
right.
all of that is distracting. All that's it's good and it's healthy, but it's not going to get you that grade. Secure the grade first, secure your assignments, then do that.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Reyna. I learned a great deal, remind me a great deal, but like I said, it just the shivers down my back of remembering of trying to do so much in so little time. But in reality, that's professional life.
Yeah, you're right. That's perfect. That's what the rest of life is going to be like. And just like college, you need to find a way to socialize and learn and be productive in ways where they build on each other, not detract from each other. And I think that if you do it right, you'll learn that in college.
I want to thank you very much for sharing what the students need to do, must do, have to do in order to be successful. And on top of that, the student applied and said, please, please let me in.
Yeah.
College says, okay, you've been admitted. Then you're committed to what you asked for. That is to get the highest grades possible, to finish in 4 years. You're going to invest $250,000. Make it worth your while.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you very much for being on the show. And I hope to have you again and have the discussion at other areas also of success in academic world other than just simply the classroom.
Mhm.
But today, that's the discussion. These are the strategies you have to have in the classroom. And first and foremost, you have to be focused, especially in the quarter system, is the
Mhm.
idea that you don't have really time to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. This was enjoyable.
Thank you very much.